Hey, hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. Now for those of you who are familiar with me and my videos, you will know that I love action games. Games that contain combat and violence. And when it comes to these action games containing combat and violence, there are many elements and features that are crucial to creating a functional, enjoyable, and interesting action within an action video game. While of course things such as gameplay mechanics, player controls, movements, attacks, abilities, all these things are essential to an action game, without a doubt. But one main feature and character type that gets overlooked a lot in video games are enemies. The enemies themselves. Your multiple AI combatants. And I'm not talking about boss battles here. I've talked about boss battles in separate videos and in more videos to come. But here, I want to talk about our overlooked adversaries in video games. Not the main villains, not the boss battles, no. The grunts, the miners, the cannon fodder, the brutes, the minions, the foot soldiers. Your typical video game enemies. And I want to discuss about what, in my opinion, makes a good enemy in a video game. First off, design. In terms of the context of your game, in terms of setting, art style, story, what you're trying to go for with your game, do the enemies and their design correlate, correspond, and mesh with what your game is and what it's about? Now, of course, with certain video games and certain genres, mostly science fiction and fantasy, you can go a bit out there. You can get a bit crazy with enemy designs, with aliens and monsters and fantasy creatures and whatnot. And when you're tackling those kinds of genres that allow for that creativity, you're able to uniquely design enemies not only from an aesthetic point of view, but also from a gameplay mechanics one. Now don't get me wrong, games with a modern military setting or a present day setting that feature humans, people, as enemies, can certainly be done well. But when human beings are the enemy of your game, you have to look at designing them from a different perspective. How do you want fighting these human enemies to be fun? Is their AI intelligent? Do they have good animation quality? Is there a great amount of detail in their clothing and combat armor that they're wearing? Do they react to the player and their environment like human beings? The difficulty with making humans, people, as enemies in your video game is that then they are expected to act and behave like human beings. Of course, that could be dependent on the tone and style of your game. If your game is over the top and silly, a tribute to old action movies, something like that, then you can get away with having less than competent human AI enemies. However, going back to fantasy and science fiction, the beauty about the fantasy and science fiction genre in video game is that when it comes to your bestiary, to your ensemble of antagonists, not only, again, can you express your creativity in designing these enemies, but you're able to add fun little gimmicks and abilities that make the enemy unique from other enemies and provide a unique combat situation for the player. Enemies that traverse the environment differently, enemies that focus on melee combat, enemies that focus on range combat, enemies that spawn more enemies, enemies that protect or heal other enemies, enemies that can block certain attacks, enemies that are immune to certain attacks. You see, with the science fiction and fantasy setting, you can come up with very convenient excuses to make your enemies unique in terms of their gameplay mechanics and mix it up for the player. The problem with setting a game in a modern military or present day setting, while you can create fun enemies to fight, them being restricted to just being human beings and not say something like creatures, aliens, robots. You see, with enemies in that setting, you can give them force fields, magic, scientific, technological, impossible weapons, equipment, all that jazz. And if your enemies aren't a typical human, aren't a typical person, you can be a bit lenient when it comes to the intelligence of the AI of your enemies. But throwing on that intelligent AI with those creative enemies is a win-win for everyone involved. However, I personally believe that to make a good enemy, a memorable enemy in a video game, you have to get at least, at the bare minimum, one of these three things right. Your enemy has to have a good design, be well designed. Your enemy has to have just the right amount of detail on their character model, and have competent animation to at the very least give the player the thought, the experience of, all things considered, that's a cool looking enemy. Up next, have your enemy challenge the player in some way. And I don't just mean strictly through difficulty, like giving the enemy a lot of health or having it do a lot of damage. Have the enemy challenge the way the player thinks. Does the enemy force the player to take cover? Does it force the player to use their abilities and their different weapons? Does it force the player to think on their feet, use tactics? Because if the player can kill your enemy, and any and all enemy types in your game, by just standing still and repeatedly hitting the attack button, then something's wrong. I find that some of the best enemies I have fought in video games are the enemies that have forced me to move, to change weapons, to use different abilities, to be precise with my aiming and or timing. If I can defeat every enemy in your game by just standing still and repeatedly hitting the attack button, then something's wrong. Finally, and this is a bit of an overlooked aspect when it comes to enemies in video games, does your enemy, and I know this is about to sound dark and creepy, does your enemy die in a satisfying manner? When the enemy in your video game is defeated, when it is killed, what happens afterwards? Do they just fall down? Do they implement ragdoll animations? Do they explode? Do you have a blood, gore, or dismemberment system in your game? Do you have the enemies disintegrate out of existence? Does loot burst from their corpses? Do they have health bars? Do damage numbers fly off them? Does something visually interesting, visually grand happen when you kill an enemy in your game? Because the absolute worst thing you can do is that when you kill an enemy in your game is have them just fall over and lie still on the ground. No ragdoll animation, no over-the-top death animation. They just fall like a flat, lifeless domino. That is just not fun. In a video game that's focused on action, on violence, and rewarding the player for getting into the action, for getting into the violence, well, you need to actually reward the player for doing that. Whether it be through explosions, ragdoll physics, unique well-done animations, maybe over-the-top voice acting and sound effects, huge big red damage numbers flying out from your last hit, gore, blood, and dismemberment, or at the very, very least, seeing a health bar deplete. Another great incentive is to every time you kill an enemy, they drop some sort of loot, whether it be ammo, health, currency, something of that nature. Reward the player visually or through gameplay mechanics. Give them that incentive to want to fight enemies, to want to defeat and kill enemies, whether it again be through the visuals or the in-game mechanics. If you have, at minimum, one of these free things, one of these free aspects, features, content implemented into your video game enemies, then it will provide your players with some sort of enjoyment from engaging the enemies. Whether it be through its visuals, whether it be through its mechanics, whether it be through what happens when they're defeated. Having at least one of these elements executed well will enlist joy from fighting these enemies. Or at least, that's how I look at it. And looking at it all as a whole, video games have provided us with some clever, unique, simply amazing enemies to fight. Whether it be the roster of aliens, robots, and mercenaries, from the Mass Effect games, the aliens in Crysis, the demons from Doom, the variety of enemies in Warframe, the Nazis in Wolfenstein, the dragons, orcs, and wizards in games like Dragon Age, The Witcher, Elder Scrolls, and the list goes on and on and on. There are so many great games with so many memorable combatants, so many well-made adversaries, that when you match them up with good combat, good weapons, good abilities, good environments, when all those elements come together with the enemies all wrapped up in the center, you have yourselves an awesome action video game. However, what do you think makes a good enemy in a video game? What are some of your favorite enemies from video games? Let me know in the comment section below. I love reading comments. I get nearly enough comments. Please leave a comment. If you like the video in any way, shape, or form, please hit the like button. Hitting the like button helps you, helps me, helps everybody involved with the video if you hit the like button. If you want to help out and support this video, then please share it on social media, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you want to help out and support me directly, then please consider pledging and becoming a patron on my Patreon. Anyways, guys, that's been a video, and I'll see you all later.